Are we going? Are we filming?
We are good.
This is chapter 17. It's on coral reefs. And so this picture right here is showing a bunch of corals extended, with their polyps extended. So yeah, this picture was very likely taken at night. And all you got to do is dive down there and have a flash on your camera, and you can take pictures like this. And sometimes I think the light makes them retreat into their shells, but I've also seen some video where the person's taking video, so I guess sometimes they're out in the light. But anyway, remember the polyp is an adult form that looks kind of like a test tube with tentacles all around the end of the tube. And so this is the mouth that can take food into it. And this little cavity here, 10 points. If you and your partner can tell me the name of the cavity inside the organism here, where the food goes to be digested and then it comes back out the mouth. 10 points if you can tell me what the name of the cavity is. Anyone? Bueller? No one?
Wait, stop. Stop it.
Are you looking it up?
3, 2, 1. Time. It's called the gastrovascular cavity.
God.
The gastrovascular cavity. Food goes into it, it's digested, it comes back out the same opening. Isn't that interesting? So there it is. You're looking into their mouth/anus. That hole in the middle.
I love it. Why can't we?
And so it looks like this, but when they retract, it doesn't look like that. It looks like the. Can you hand me the? Will, hand me the coral shells there. I think there's one under the hat. Yeah, that's the one I'm looking for. Here you go. So this. This is brain coral because it looks like a brain. If the polyps were extended, it would look like that. If the polyps are retracted, it would look like this.
Holy.
There's little holes in there.
Holy.
I'll pass this around so you can see the little holes. Take note of the little tiny holes within the brain coral. That's where these creatures live. They're really small. I'm going to pass this one around too. Take note of the little tiny holes where these things would live. You can get an idea of how big these creatures are and how many of them there are there in one little area of coral. So they feed, and then when it's daytime, they retract, and they go into their little shell. 10 points if you can tell me what the shell is made out of. They've made a little shell for themselves.
Get one. Get the thing.
A little skeleton.
We're supposed to yell it out.
No.
10 points if you can tell me what that's made out of.
Hold the camera.
On a what? Right here.
Bring it up here. Peach got it right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
White got it right. Blue got it right.
Oh, right there.
Tony, hit the folks real quick.
Orange is incorrect. Purple not right or wrong, and green is correct. It's called calcium carbonate.
I thought that was the one you were talking about. They made their own shells.
Calcium carbonate.
No, but with the dead, like shells of the other animals.
No, those aren't dead shells.
What are those?
You're
You're talking about those things that like
Radiolarians.
Would you like to
okay.
the camera to see the coral?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Look at the coral. Look at it, superstar.
Look at the pores.
Video footage of a coral
Coral.
doing its thing.
A coral reef.
Hey, Christmas.
It can be one of the liveliest places on Earth. But what's really surprising is how much more goes on here than meets the eye. Even the corals themselves are alive.
Look at them, they're out there.
They're made up of tiny animals called coral polyps distant cousins of jellyfish. Hundreds, even thousands of polyps can make up a coral. And this impressive reef, they built it, millimeter by millimeter. How? A polyp is mostly stomach, with a mouth on top. It sits in a hard skeleton that's part of the reef. The polyp takes in dissolved minerals from the water and mixes them with proteins. Then it rises up out of its skeleton, leaving space below. It deposits calcium carbonate, also known as limestone, into this space. Over time, each little polyp not only builds its own skeleton, but adds to the structure of the reef. So what gives the polyp the energy for all this building? A unique partnership. Inside most reef-building polyps are tiny algae called zooxanthellae. They use energy from the sun to photosynthesize, producing up to 95% of the food the corals need. As animals, the corals emit nutrients valuable to the algae too, and also give them a protected place in which to live. This trade-off benefits both the algae and the corals. It's called a symbiotic relationship. The algae are even responsible for the colors we identify with corals.
So they showed this coral that they're showing here. This coral polyp actually had the zooxanthellae, is how I pronounce it. You pronounce it a little different, but anyway. They actually have the algae living on their bodies. So this one right here has algae living on its body. Not all corals are like that. Some of them have the algae living on their body, and some of them have the algae just in the chamber along with it. But either way, the algae makes extra food and it's sucked up by the coral. In exchange, the coral, nothing's going to come eat the algae without getting by the coral. And especially if it's living on the coral, nothing can eat the algae without eating the coral. And the coral has stingers. So, it protects the algae. The algae don't get eaten. Isn't that a good relationship?
That's symbiotic? Or?
That's called symbiosis, yeah, mutualism. Mutualism means two things living together helping each other. Thank you. You have organisms living with you, did you know that? In your intestine.
Bacteria.
Bacteria. And you protect them. Nothing can get to them without getting eaten. Nothing can eat them without eating you. So that's a good place for them. They make vitamins for you, for us.
They feed.
And we feed them extra food that we don't digest.
So the different people from different regions have different bacteria?
Yes. Everybody has a different bacterial colony in their guts. They're finding out. Everybody's a little bit different. A lot depends on what you eat. Some of it's genetic. Some of it depends on your diet. Some of it depends on where you live.
So do you think I have more protein?
It depends. Well, yeah. You have more organisms. If you eat a lot of protein, you have a bacteria that are adjusted to being able to eat some of that. So anyway, this shows how a coral reef is built. And we talked about this before. Remember the atoll that we spoke of? So here is an island, a volcanic island, and coral, as you see, is the red stuff building up around the sides of it. And as the island erodes, the coral reef will get bigger and bigger. And the island can eventually sink underneath the ocean. And you're often just left with a ring of coral. That's called an atoll. Atolls can be big structures in the ocean. I mean, some of them can be the size of, like the Hawaiian Islands, will eventually become atolls as they erode and get smaller and eventually will disappear under the ocean. You'll be left with a huge atoll the size of Hawaii. I mean, that's a big place if you've been to it before. You can see that. So some of the atolls that we run into in the oceans are very big, and that's all coral. And corals can form. Corals will often form long structures too, like the Great Barrier Reef. It's a very very big structure. This is showing a reef. Reef building coral.
Coral islands are formed by coral reefs, which are limestone formations composed of tiny sea organisms and their remains. A coral reef may grow around a sinking volcanic island. Some volcanic islands sink because of the sinking of the ocean floor. As the island sinks, the coral reef continues to grow upward and forms a ring-like barrier reef. After the island has submerged, only a circular reef called an atoll remains.
That was not good. Apologize for that video. So you need to learn the zones of a coral reef. So a lot of reefs form near the shore, especially rocky shores have reefs can kind of encrust themselves onto the rock and grow upward. And so you have what's called the outer reef or forereef, are all the corals that are nearest to the ocean. So even in that atoll that we showed, there are some corals that are furthest out. And those corals are usually different species than the corals that are further in. Those corals are made to take the pounding of the waves, and maybe a lot of them grow deeper, and might have less, be able to receive less light, and grow in places with lower light. A lot of times you'll see red coral down deep. Why would the coral down deep be red? Anyone have any ideas?
Red
Because of the light, like,
they're not
Sam?
absorbing
Try.
red.
because it doesn't absorb red light in the dark time.
Yeah, the algae that's living with the coral, so you have algae here living in the coral shell. This algae might very well, if the coral is a deeper coral, this algae might have red pigments which don't absorb red. Red will just bounce off of them, but it will absorb blue because blue penetrates light better. So if you go down there and shine a light on them, they look red because they aren't absorbing red. They are only absorbing the blue. And so the red light just bounces off of them, the blue is absorbed, and you see it as red. And so the algae down deeper are often red algae. What's that?
What if you took it out, like, out of the water? What color would it be?
It'd be red.
Oh, okay.
Because it's got pigments that are absorbing the blue.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just like shining a light on it. So I think that's why they put a little red color here spotted in here, because there's a lot of red looking coral down there. And then as you go further in, you get to a place that's shallow called the Reef Crest. And you can see, if you kind of look at the way this thing is, it's shallowest right here. And then it gets a little bit deeper, and you have what's called the inner reef, or the reef flat, that is in between the reef crest and the shore. The reef crest is kind of like a sandbar, the sandbars that we have, except it's not sand, it's coral. And the reef crest will break the waves, and I think that's what they're showing there is like breaking waves. And will protect the inner reef. So the organisms here, the coral that are here on the inner reef, are more protected. They get less wave action, so they're different types of coral. Coral you see that are flat like this, see how that's flat? That's a good shape if there's a lot of waves in the area. You don't want to be hit by the waves, so you can be nice and flat like this. So you see a lot of flat brain type corals in areas that's real wavy. In areas that don't have much waves, you can grow branches like this. And be kind of like a plant does, growing branches to catch as much sunlight as you can. And so this wouldn't work where there's a lot of wave action, because the waves would slam into this and break it. something nice and flat like this isn't going to be broken very easily by waves, but this thing could. You see what I'm saying? So you might find this type of coral in the inner reef where there's not much wave action, and you might find this type of coral in the outer reef where there's more wave action. Make sense? So you got to memorize for the test the 3: outer reef, reef crest, and inner reef. It's not that hard. I mean, but there's different names. This is called the forereef also, and this is called the reef flat also. So there's different names to go with this. We don't have, if you just go off the shore of where we are, we don't have coral right offshore, right next to our beach. There's not a good place for them to attach because it's so muddy. And also, there's so much mud in the water that sunlight can't get through it. So this isn't a good place for coral to grow right off our beaches. But if you go out about 40 miles, there's a huge coral reef out there. Have y'all ever heard of this place? It's called Gray's Reef. It's about 40 miles offshore. You can go out there. You ever go fishing out there at Gray's Reef? Good place for fish, right? You ever go diving or snorkeling? It's a lot clearer water out there, isn't it? There's not as much mud out in the water that far out. And this is coral that's growing all the way from the bottom up, and it forms a nice big reef out there, Gray's Reef, which is a big zone for lots of fish. And have you ever seen any whales out there?
No, I haven't seen any whales.
The whales will come out and raise their calves around there.
Well,
Southern right whales, that's what they're called.
where is it exactly?
It's about 40 miles offshore from here, straight to the east.
It's a little north.
It's a little northeast?
A little north.
Okay.
This area.
Slightly.
It's about 40 miles, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Zones of the coral reef. Watching video.
To most of us, coral reefs are simply wonderlands,
Needlefish.
thriving ecosystems that support
shark.
thousands of different species.
Sea turtle.
But to scientists, this habitat is more complex and varied. And different organisms, including different types of corals, live in specific parts of the reef.
I don't know what
Scientists divide coral reefs into zones. They base these divisions on location within the reef and characteristics such as depth, wave action,
that is. Wavy.
light intensity, temperature, and water chemistry. The zones can vary depending on the kind of reef and its location in the world. The most common type of reef is the fringing reef, which grows outward from coastlines of islands and continents. In a fringing reef, the zone found along the shoreline is called the reef flat.
Wow.
For corals, it's a tough place to live. Wide variations in temperature and salinity challenge the corals, and low tides expose them to air. Species that survive here have adapted and often look different than they do in deeper water. The reef flat extends out to the highest part of the reef, called the Reef Crest. This zone receives the greatest amount of sunlight. Its crusty surface, made of calcium carbonate, can survive the brute force of the waves, which hit hardest here. The last zone of the fringing reef is the one farthest from shore, the reef front, or forereef. In the shallower part of this zone, the diversity of corals is greater than in other parts of the reef. They thrive between 5 and 20 meters deep, where sunlight filters down and wave action is gentle. farther out to sea, the reef front slopes downward and can reach great depths. Corals here often grow wide and flat to take maximum advantage of the faint sunlight. A good example of organisms adjusting to the zone's characteristics. A fringing reef may be the most common type of reef, but there are two other types whose zone pattern, or zonation, as scientists say, is somewhat different. One is called a barrier reef. Here, the shoreline is separated from the reef by an expanse of water called a lagoon. Next to it, a zone named the back reef leads to the reef crest. The size and depth of lagoons vary widely. The corals that live here do too. The third type of reef is called an atoll. It's usually circular or oval in shape, with a lagoon in the center. The same zones can be found in the atoll too. But the back reef is located in the center along with the lagoon, while the other zones extend outwards from the shoreline. Understanding the different zones in coral reefs contributes to our appreciation of the whole ecosystem, one of the most diverse and productive on Earth.
Yay. That was good pictures of that.
With quality.
So,
Captain Gum.
I didn't talk about the lagoon. Sometimes you have a lagoon form along with those different reef zones. Coral reefs occupy less than 0.1% of the ocean's surface, yet they provide a home for 25% of all marine species. So this is kind of like the rainforest of the ocean. There's not a whole lot of it there, but it's very important because there's a lot of organisms that live there. The coral forms the bottom of the food chain, and you have small fish that eat the coral, you have big fish that eat the small fish, you have top predators that eat the big fish, like sharks, or dolphins or something like that. So you have a whole food chain going on in the coral reef. If you go in the ocean away from the coral reef, there's not much life around. You don't see a whole lot of fish and that sort of stuff. You see a lot of them at the coral reef, which is why you go fishing at the coral reef, right? There's a lot of stuff there. So our reefs are really important. And we're worried about the reefs. Oh, by the way, there's a nice map showing where all the reefs are. You can see there's a whole bunch of them over here. The Great Barrier Reef is right here. That's this long one right here. It's the biggest one. It's like 1,800 miles long. And what we know about scientists are really worried about the reefs because they're starting to die out. And one of the main reasons that they're dying out is because of what's called coral, or what's happening is called coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is when the corals turn white. I think I have some pictures of them. There we go. See the white coral there? That coral's white because the algae that live in them are dead. There's no more algae left, and the coral just goes a pale white. And the coral dies too. If it loses its algae, it dies. And the reason why these corals are dying, there's a lot of reasons, but probably the biggest reason is because the extra carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere. What happens when we burn anything, we burn fuel, we burn oil, we cut down trees in forests to build condos, and we end up burning those trees. And all this carbon dioxide that used to be in the ground goes up into the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide reacts with water in clouds to form HCO3, which is basically carbonic acid. I think it might be H2CO3. And this is like a weak acid that rains out. Have you ever heard of acid rain?
Yes.
That's what acid rain is partly formed from. And it rains out and changes the pH of the ocean. And the corals are really sensitive to a pH change. The pH of the ocean, does anyone know what the pH of the ocean is? We studied that 2 chapters ago.
7.4.
Do it, George. It's 7.4. And if that pH changes from 7.4, let's say it goes to 7.2, that's more acidic because of the acid rain. It goes from 7.4 to 7.2. That'll kill a lot of these coral. And it turns white. So wherever you see white coral, that's just the shell of the corals left. You know how shells are white? Calcium carbonate is white. Y'all, this is dead because there's no living coral in here. That's why it's white. And so it'll turn this color when there's nothing alive in it. And so if you see white coral, that's not good. What's that?
Can you bring coral back to life though if you do pump in carbon dioxide?
Well, if you change the pH back, yeah, and then and sometimes the coral will evolve and just grow back. But they usually won't inhabit the old coral shells. They'll kind of grow over it and make new ones. So they aren't like going to move back in.
Right.
That's a good question. So we're worried about corals dying. Read that section. You're welcome. Oh, and we're probably not going to be here tomorrow, so keep reading and studying.
Clutch.
And I'll give you the new syllabus.
Date of video taken, Hurricane Matthew, Eve.
Thank you, George.